Hey 8th graders, I'm Miss Henderson. I'm an 8th grade ELA teacher at Ferndale Middle School, and I'm really excited to be working with you today. For this lesson, you'll need your ELA notebook, pen or pencil, and if you have the core text George versus George, then you should have that with you, but if not, don't worry about it, it'll be on the screen. So today we're going to analyze how authors develop central ideas using supporting ideas and details. And we're doing this to prepare you for your constructed response where you're going to have to do the same thing. So we often just focus on using the details to help us determine the central idea. But today we're going to focus on how the author uses these details that eventually lead us to our central idea. So we're going to analyze how the author uses specific details in this section of George versus George. And this is a section we've already read before. And when you go to practice this, you should do the same thing. Use a text you've already read before. Before we really hop into the work, though, we're going to reread this text. London, with its 740,000 inhabitants, was the biggest city in Europe and the center of British government. London's residents were proud of their long history and high level of cultural achievement. For fun, they went to mass balls and theaters, gambled at cards, dice, roulette, belonged to all sorts of clubs, and met at coffee houses, taverns, cockfights, chop houses, and pleasure gardens. Noisy streets teemed with horses, carriages, ballad singers, flower sellers, fishmongers, and ladies and gentlemen in fancy white wigs wearing all the latest fashions. But the overcrowded city had its share of problems too. The death rate was high. All the coal that residents used as fuel caused black rain and thick, sooty smog. Food and drinking water were often unhealthy. Riots were common, and public hangings drew rowdy crowds. Thousands of beggars and pickpockets were evidence of poverty run amok. So now that we've read the text, let's look at how the author used these details. So we identified the central idea of this text in a previous lesson, but remember, to do that, we always look at the topic, and we know the topic is London. So this whole section was about the city of London. What did the author want us to understand about London? That it was the center of British government, had many cultural achievements, but it also had several issues. So one of the supporting ideas that helps us come to that conclusion, we see in this part of the text, is that London had a long history and high level of cultural achievement. So what details does the author use to support the idea that London had a high level of cultural achievements? Well, the author tells us all the things that they do for fun, went to mass balls, went to coffee houses. She also tells us what the streets looked like. They were noisy, filled with horses, carriages, and people in the latest fashion. So I just added those details to my graphic organizer. The second paragraph helps us understand our second supporting idea, that London had its share of issues too. It tells us that the city was overcrowded, the death rate was high, had lots of pollution, unhealthy drinking water, violence, and poverty is run amok. So now we want to look at how the author uses these details to develop the supporting idea. Looking at what I've underlined in green, the author tells us all the things they do for fun. They go to mass balls, they play cards, they go to coffee houses, they go to all sorts of clubs. So the author has given examples of all the fun and fancy activities that they do. In orange, we see a description of what the streets might look like. You might see horses, carriages, ballad singers, people in fancy white wigs. So the author is just describing what one would see on those streets. So let's look at an example of how we might explain how the author uses these details to support an idea. In paragraph 1, the author provides many examples of the extravagant activities London citizens did for fun and places they gathered. She describes what you would see on the streets of London so the reader understands the busyness of the city. So now let's look at how the author uses these key details to support this idea. In the second paragraph, we learn that London has a lot of problems, and the author shows us that by giving us examples of those problems. They have black rain, unhealthy food and drinking water, poverty. So the author helped us understand that supporting idea by giving us examples of all of those problems. So we can explain how the author uses these details like this. In paragraph 2, the author provides multiple examples of the major issues the citizens of London dealt with. So all we did today is we pulled the central ideas, supporting ideas, and details that we had done in a previous lesson, and we went a little bit deeper into the details and looked at how the author organized them to get us to understand these supporting ideas to help us understand this central idea. So now you're going to practice this on your own. As I said before, you should choose a text you've already read and are kind of familiar with and have pulled out the central idea, supporting ideas, and key details. And I want you to really focus your energy and your attention on how the author uses these details to help us understand the supporting idea, just like we did earlier. And your central idea may have had more than just 2 supporting ideas. It may have more than 3, and that's totally fine. You'll follow just the same process. So let's review what we did today. We briefly reviewed how to determine the central idea of a text, and we analyzed how the author used specific details to support ideas in George versus George. Hopefully after this lesson, you feel way more prepared for your constructed response at the end of the week. Thank you so much for learning with me today. I can't wait to see you back here for our next lesson.